Welcome to Leadership and Culture First, where we discuss the complexities of leadership and culture, but also offer solutions to aspiring new and experienced leaders. We invite guest speakers to share their knowledge and experience and ask those challenging questions. As coaches, we aim to provide real insights, enable reflection, and challenge thinking. Join us on our mission to unleash your leadership potential. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this episode. Really delighted to share that joining us today, we're joined by Jules from Kindred Neurodiversity. Jules is an executive coach who brings unique experience and perspective on leadership, neurodiversity, and the lived experience of being a female leader navigating her own journey. We'll dive into how coaching can unlock potential, what neurodiversity means for leadership today, and the lessons Jules has learnt along the way. So it would be really interesting, Jules, just to get us started, just tell us and the listeners how you and Nikki first met.
Be good about this, Jules.
I will. Well, thank you both for having me, first of all. I just wanted to say thank you for this opportunity. It's lovely to come and speak to you both today. And yeah, Nikki and I first met on our ILM coaching qualification. We were part of the same cohort, and I actually think we were together in a practice pair on the first day. And I remember feeling very impressed by Nikki, if not slightly intimidated by Nikki. But we were together in our practice pair, and it was a bit of a baptism of fire for both of us, probably for everybody. And then fast forward, we were put together in a group, a coaching triad, and Nikki coached me, and I coached our other lovely colleague. And yeah, it was a really nice triad, the three of us together, working together, and really we were watching each other become coaches in real time. It was a really, really nice journey to be on, and just to see those coaching conversations evolve. And it's definitely influenced how I coach today. So yeah, I'm really pleased to be here back with Nikki again, and it's a nice full circle moment, and nice to meet Sharon as well.
Yeah, really nice to meet you too. That's a really great story, and it's really interesting how relationships do develop out of those sorts of experiences, isn't it? So yeah. So what then first drew you into executive coaching in the first place?
So I first got into coaching. I was first drawn to coaching because I think it's about listening for me. I was really kind of drawn by the power of listening. And I think, we all lead busy lives and just don't think there are that many opportunities in life to feel really, truly listened to, in a real deep, non-judgmental way. And I think the opportunity to offer that to people was just something that I thought would be just incredibly valuable, really kind of tied in with my natural skill set as well. So yeah, that's how I first got into coaching. That's what drew me in the first place. And I've worked with people from multiple different backgrounds. And when I work with people who are in leadership roles, what's really stood out there is how isolating those roles can sometimes be. And, there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of expectation, there's not much space for vulnerability, there's a lot of competing demands. And I just think that, yeah, in those leadership roles in particular, they can be really isolating, and having that space to open up with somebody safely and vulnerably is invaluable, really.
So just it's really interesting when you talk about those experiences of people who've seen. Do you see that as the biggest challenge senior leaders bring into coaching conversations, or are there other challenges that they tend to bring?
I think that sense of isolation is a big challenge, definitely. Other challenges tend to be around, one of the biggest ones is around perfectionism, I would say, because I work with neurodivergent people. Often they can turn up with this narrative of, everything has to be perfect. and perfection is not attainable. And whether you're in leadership or otherwise, perfection is, something that many people want to strive for, but it's not attainable. And they're striving for this perfectionism, they're striving for this standard, and at the same time, they're battling burnout, really struggling. And what I see is a lot of that perfectionism for neurodivergent people in particular is connected to rejection sensitivity, and it's a protective behavior, protecting themselves from being criticized or judged. So there's this, I have to set these high standards, I have to be perfect. And so coaching offers an opportunity to kind of question that and what's driving that perfectionism, where does that message come from, what's behind it. And yeah, just it's really kind of opening up that awareness, because as soon as you've got that awareness and that understanding, you can then start to lessen the grip that perfectionism has. So that's definitely a big one, that comes in relation to leadership, perfectionism. And then it's the challenges around executive functioning. It's the sensory demands. Often when you're in a busy environment, the sensory overload is real. And, that the higher up you get in your position, in your career, the more challenges there are, and it just layers upon layer upon layer. And there just comes a time where you need a space to peel back those layers and share that vulnerability.
Yeah. So how then would you, just reflecting on what you've said, how do you balance challenge and support when working with your clients?
It's a really good question, because my instinct with people is to be supportive first and foremost, and my coaching practice is built on building psychological safety first of all. And yes, my natural tendency is to be supportive and hold someone's hand through the difficult times. And you're right, sometimes challenge is what's needed. So it is about balance, and I think the first focus has to be on making sure someone feels safe. And then it's about opening up that discovery piece, that understanding more about yourself, understanding more about your strengths, understanding more about your particular challenges that you're facing, not just the challenges, but why you're facing them. And suddenly, once you start understanding why you're facing those challenges, it then helps you to look at new directions, new ways of doing things. And so the challenge for me comes around, okay, you might be here because you know that there's a particular pain point, a particular struggle. What are we going to do about that now? We've got some knowledge around it. And that's where the challenge comes in for me. With me, it's always quite gentle. I'm not an overtly challenging person. Nikki will know that. But it's an important part of coaching. It has to be there. And most people challenge themselves quite naturally once they're given that information about themselves, that or grow that awareness about themselves. I often find that people then challenge themselves. They will bring the question, what can I do with that information? What am I going to do next? What am I going to do differently? How can I move on from here?
Thanks, Jules, for the introduction. I'm sorry if it was a little bit intimidating. I do apologise, but I have to say, thank you, really. And one of the reasons for bringing you onto this podcast was I was blown away during our training around the breadth and depth of your knowledge around neurodiversity and around leadership and around coaching, really. And it was a real honour to take that journey with you. And I'd like to say thank you for that.
Thank you.
But I'm going to ask you some questions around neurodiversity, because this is an area which is something often quite difficult for coaches, but also for leaders. And it's an area which has grown, I think, in recognition. Certainly that's something that we've seen and in all areas, not just in healthcare. So it's becoming more visible in conversations in leadership circles, and something that we're talking about more. How How would you describe how it means to you personally and professionally?
It's a good question. And those two things are separate but interlinked. So personally, for me, it's my identity. I'm ADHD and autistic, and I'm late diagnosed. So this was, quite new information to me within the last few years. I'm also a parent to neurodivergent daughters. So I have all this lived experience. Now, for a long time, I didn't know it was lived experience because I didn't know what it was, but I was still experiencing my life and I still bring that with me. But now I've got some language and some terminology around it and some understanding of my experiences. So being neurodivergent, I would say it shapes all my experiences. It shapes everything. It's my sensory processing. It's how I think, how I communicate, how I empathize with people. And so coming into that awareness about myself has been huge, really. And realizing that for years before I understood it, I was masking, I was trying to fit into what I thought was expected of me. And that takes an awful lot of energy, and you become somewhat disconnected from yourself, and you don't really feel like you know yourself. And so discovering my neurodivergent identity wasn't just about understanding I've got, this challenge or that challenge. It was actually about understanding what works for me and what my needs are and what my preferences are and what my skills are and embracing them, my intuitive thinking, my creative problem solving, just the different ways that I am. We're all different. And so that for me was a big thing to discover that about myself. And I see it all the time in people who I'm working with, that discovery, that rediscovery of identity. And so professionally, it ties together because then when I'm working with people who are neurodivergent and I see, certainly as awareness is growing generally, that moment where people start to understand themselves more and accept their own identity more and in a new way, it's incredibly powerful and it's incredibly important. And there's so much ableism, there's so much masking. There are people who think they can't share certain parts of their personality or their identity in certain spaces, the workplace being one of them, and to kind of give them the tools, the information, the advocacy skills to embrace that is it's really, really powerful. And it has a knock-on effect to, their general well-being, their leadership excellence, their team, the broader team. It really kind of has a ripple effect because then we see that people are embracing their identity positively and advocating for themselves and setting boundaries. And yeah, just it feels like very important work to support people with that.
Do you think there's anything specific in your experience around coaching that can help our executive leaders or even help people who are leading neurodiverse teams?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And the truth is, of course, every human is different, neurodivergent or otherwise. And I think the first point of understanding is that we're all different. And actually this idea that we all need to perform to this normative set of standards is quite outdated. We are all different, whether we have a particular label for it or not. We have different thinking styles, different communication styles. And so I think in a workplace context, it's really important. Coming back to that psychological safety again, it's really important that colleagues feel that psychological safety to open up about their needs, to open up about their challenges, to open up about their strengths that might not be being used, to be able to safely have those conversations. This is difficult for me, and this is why it's difficult for me. And if we could change it this way, that would be easier for me. But actually, did you also know I'm really good at that, and I would love to get stuck into that? And I think that would be a really helpful conversation in the workplace. So for leaders to embrace that kind of mindset where we're looking at everybody's unique strengths and challenges would be really useful. And then from a leadership context, I think, for the neurodivergent leader themselves, I think it's really interesting because I think there are a lot of people coming to awareness later in life. And so you might find that you've got somebody in a leadership or an executive role who didn't know they were neurodivergent or didn't fully understand their neurodivergence as they were stepping into that role. And now they're there and they've got the responsibility and they've got the workload and the demands. And actually, the awareness is dawning. This is quite challenging, and this might be quite challenging in different ways than I'd anticipated. And it's suddenly that, right, I need to explore something different. There's something different going on here. And unpacking that neurodivergence with someone who understands it so that you know how best to thrive, really. If you've got to that position, you've got there because you've got, some skills, some talents, some real drive. But if you then get to that position and find that it's overwhelming, we need to tap back into that talent, the skills, the strengths, that drive. And I think, again, it comes back to that identity piece. Once you understand that about yourself and you're not trying to hide those aspects of yourself and you can embrace them, then that's when you can thrive as a leader as well.
We interrupt this podcast to tell you more about our sponsor, Access Culture Group. Access exists to support leaders, teams, and organisations to build cultures where people feel safe, seen, and able to thrive. From executive coaching and leadership development to organisational, culture, and system-wide learning, Access helps turn people-focused values into real-world change. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, visit accessculturegroup.co.uk or find us on all major social platforms. And if you've even got a story to share or think your work belongs in this conversation, we would love to hear from you. Reach out. You might just be one of our next guests. Now, back to the next episode. So refreshing to hear. It's really good to hear not only from your experiences, but also how you feel that would impact on organisations and individuals as they move through leadership. Do you think there's anything practical that organisations could do, change perhaps, to help a psychological safety and make environments more inclusive for neurodiversity individuals? Or should I say, how do you term it? This is something I'd like to ask you. How do you term it? Because when we talk about neurodiversity, do we talk about neurodiversity individuals? Do we talk about people with neurodiversity? How do people term it?
It's a great question, and there's certainly a lot of debate around it. And the current preference seems to largely be for identity first language, so autistic person rather than person with autism. Although it's grammatically not correct and it bugs me, an ADHD person rather than a person with ADHD, a neurodivergent person. Neurodiverse refers to the whole spectrum of people, so everybody, whether they are ADHD, autistic, dyslexic, none of those things. We are all neurodiverse, just like nature is biodiverse. So yeah, a neurodivergent person would be somebody who is ADHD, autistic, dyslexic, and so on. I won't try and list them all because I'll miss one out and I'll feel bad. There are too many. So yeah, that's the terminology. And in answering that, I've forgotten the previous question.
I'm sorry, that was me there. That's probably a little bit of ADHD there from me going off on a tangent, as everybody knows. But certainly what I wanted to say was, have you got any sort of practical shifts, practical advice for organisations around psychological safety and inclusive environments?
Yes. So I think there are some really practical environmental things. So I think understanding different sensory needs is a really big thing. And interestingly, it's a really big thing when individuals come to coaching. They don't necessarily think it's going to be a topic. Sometimes it gets dismissed a bit. But when we dive into it and explore it, suddenly people start really realizing, wow, yeah, I do have a lot of sensory needs. And the easiest thing to think about is people quite commonly say, yeah, I struggle with lots and lots of background noise. That can be difficult for me. And that's the easy one to identify with. Lots of people can understand that. But there's way more than just that. So it could be factors around air conditioning being too cold, or it could be that the lights are too bright for people, or it could be that the orientation of the desk is not optimum for that person. Sensory needs go beyond just the obvious things as well. And that's something I do a real deep dive with my coaching clients. So yeah, looking at the external environment is a massive one. Looking at flexibility, again, having this set of standards, this set of what we call neuronormative standards of people have to be in the workplace by a certain time, or when you're on a Teams meeting, you must have your camera on. And I understand the practical implications of that. There are some workplaces where there can't be any flexibility. There are times where flexibility could be used and it would be really beneficial. And for people being able to work at their optimum, that would really change everything for the whole organization. If everyone was able to work at their optimum speed, their optimum processing, things around communication, having a meeting and then sending the minutes afterwards, sending it written down, non-ambiguous communication is a massive one. So changing the language around, oh, could we have a catch up in half an hour to, I'd like to speak to you about X, Y, Z. It just removes that ambiguity and that stress of, well, what's it going to be about? What are we going to talk about? Am I in trouble? What's going on here? So there's some real practical things like that. And then there's some much deeper things around just understanding neurodiversity and understanding, for example, the interest-based nervous system that drives an ADHD person. Instead of being driven by importance, our nervous system and the way we regulate our dopamine responds to different factors such as passion, interest, novelty, cooperation and competition, and urgency. And they're the factors that will get an ADHD person going, and they will, move. I don't know if you've ever experienced an ADHD person once they get moving, but they're hard to stop. We can give our attention to something and give it very deeply. We can hyperfocus and we can be so productive. If those factors aren't there, you can tell us all day long it's important. It's just not going to get us started. We're just not going to be able to get going. And so I guess the answer there is that kind of education piece, learning stuff like that, informing yourself about these different aspects of a neurodivergent person's experience. It really could just transform everything if understanding was more widespread and deeper.
I could listen to you all day about
Me too.
this. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think
Don't tempt me.
The other thing I'm also really interested in is, as a female leader yourself, what have been some of the pivotal moments in your journey to get to where you are today?
So my awareness of my neurodivergence is a massive one, because that's what drove me to start this journey in coaching. And really, Kindred Neurodiversity, this coaching journey, all was born out of this late realization that I was ADHD and autistic, and trying to kind of build that support that I would have benefited from. That's where it started. So that was a really pivotal moment, that awareness. And then pivotal moments, what else? I think if we're talking about being a woman, I don't think I can go without talking about hormones. The hormonal piece is a really kind of pivotal. I mean, it's a big challenge. The fact as well that when you're neurodivergent, those hormonal fluctuations, perinatal, perimenopause, they impact our experience greatly. They impact our executive functions. They impact the way we experience the world. And so, certainly for me, the time after I had my children, that was, that was a real turning point in my life, because that hormone crash was, wow, I can't cope, I can't do anything. And I'm now in my 40s and perimenopausal, and that those hormones are fluctuating again, and I've got a hormonal teenager, which is just a lovely part of the plan, isn't it? And so those hormonal fluctuations are affecting my ADHD traits and my autistic traits again. And so this is again another kind of pivotal moment where I'm thinking, what adaptations, what changes can I make to support these changes that I'm experiencing? And again, that's a really common theme in coaching with women. Obviously, we tend to come to leadership roles perhaps a little bit further down the line, perhaps a little bit later in life. So perimenopause is on the table at that point, and we've maybe coped fine until then. The hormones change, and the ADHD symptoms just, I don't like to say symptoms, I'll take that back. The ADHD traits suddenly just, explode. I can't concentrate. I can't remember anything. How did I get into this role? How did I get into this position? This self-doubt comes in again. I can't do anything right. I can't believe that I've got this job, this imposter syndrome. So I've flipped that conversation from talking about myself to talking about other people. But yes, that's a pivotal moment, that hormonal piece, definitely.
The hormones, the gift that just keeps giving, isn't it?
Aren't they just?
So just thinking about that a bit further then, sorts of are there any barriers you faced or biases, and how have you navigated them?
I think neurodivergent people face a lot of barriers generally. And I think there is this stigma that in some circles is reducing, and that's fantastic. It's now, it's much more possible to own your identity now and openly say to somebody, I'm ADHD, I'm autistic, in some circles. And then there are other circles where that's not encouraged, it's not received well, it's not understood, it's not respected. And that, I think, is a huge barrier to anybody, but certainly in a leadership role, because you're then going to have to mask this huge part of yourself to be able to function in that role. And when you separate yourself into separate aspects of your identity and you're trying to hide part of your identity, you can't show up as an authentic human. You can't show up as an authentic leader. You are going to miss those opportunities to connect with vulnerability with other people in your team and your colleagues and the people that you're working with. And I think that vulnerability and that connection, I think, is actually a really important part of being a leader, because I'm not sure I would want to be led by somebody who was untouchable and not vulnerable and not showing me their real self in any way. And I felt they weren't authentic. I wouldn't respond to that at all. I've got a radar for authenticity. And if someone's not being authentic with me, I'm not going to want to follow them. I don't want them to be my leader. I can talk too much, and I feel like I've lost the thread of the question. I hope that answered that question.
Absolutely. I think that whole piece around authenticity is absolutely, and how that links to biases and barriers, absolutely. And I think it links on to something else I'd quite like to ask, is about advice you would give to women stepping into senior leadership roles today. I think what you've just said links quite nicely with that. What other advice would you give?
I think understanding yourself understanding and accepting your own unique rhythms. I'm using rhythms. I'm feeling like that might not be the best term, but that's what springs to mind. You know, no two people are the same. Your leadership is not going to be the same as someone else's leadership. You know, you need to bring your own lived experience, your own empathy, your own authenticity, and not try to emulate somebody else's, because what makes a successful leader is, I think, that authenticity piece. And so if you're trying to emulate somebody else, if you're trying to live up to somebody else's standards or fill somebody else's shoes, you are going to miss that authenticity piece. And I think the other piece of advice would be around boundaries and building in time for rest and recognizing when you need to step back and recognizing when you need to say no, and recognizing that burnout is not a badge of honor. You know, it's a warning. It's you need to step back. You need to take care of yourself, and building that in early and building in the support for that. I think, you know, don't wait till it becomes too much. Build in the support as a preventative measure.
That is such really helpful feedback. I think that burnout not being a badge of honor, that is absolutely something that will stick in my mind. Thank you. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's a mantra that we all should live by, definitely, because we almost see it as a badge of honor sometimes. So I think that's essential. So you started the leadership journey into coaching now. And what do you think is the future of executive coaching for you? What excites you the most?
I think what excites me the most is this growing awareness. I think coaching, there's a growing awareness and a growing acceptance of coaching. It used to have this feel of being quite elite, maybe, reserved for just executives. And I feel like it's becoming more accessible. I feel like it's becoming a useful tool across the board in a well-being sense, in, you know, coaching whole teams rather than just coaching the leaders. I feel like it's definitely becoming more accessible and more recognized. And then the growing awareness around neurodiversity and inclusion generally, I think these are really powerful shifts that are happening. And I'm really excited to be part of that. I love being part of this community of neurodivergent people. I definitely feel to have found my people. And that just really excites me to be part of that. And to be able to, it's being able to reach those people. And certainly, you know, there are people who are out there who are successful and who are doing really well, but they're a bit like a swan. You know, it looks great, but they're paddling away underneath and they need a bit of support. And we might not be able to see that they need the support. But when I get to work with those people who are swans, and then you get to uncover, actually, I'm paddling like mad and I don't know what I'm doing and I need some support. Those conversations, those coaching relationships are, well, they're just magic. They're just magic, really. To see that growth in people. So that excites me going forward, working with more people like that. And personally, in my coaching business, I'm trying to expand into making my coaching more accessible to people by working in group programs and creating a more of a circle, peer support circle program where I can support multiple people at once, but also facilitate that connection between people. Because I think it takes me back to that isolation piece at the beginning. I think there's too many of us, neurodivergent people, women, leaders, whatever. Too many of us are just feeling isolated. And I actually think building those peer connections of people with similar experiences, kindreds, if you like, I think that's really powerful. And so I'm really excited personally to be working towards that kind of model in my business. And yeah, just meeting more fantastic people and supporting them.
I think it's amazing to get an insight into your world in this podcast and the knowledge that you have acquired over your leadership journey and into coaching. So I'm going to ask you a question that was posed by a previous podcaster. And I'm going to ask you, I'm going to read this here to make sure I get this right. If you wanted to describe yourself in 3 words, what 3 words would you use to describe yourself and why?
Okay. Well, my answer to this is I'm a neurodivergent person who doesn't like talking about myself. So I would probably, in most scenarios, decline this. But I did listen to Professor Laura Serrant, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, last week, and I heard her ask that. And I thought, oh, I'm not going to be able to decline it. I'll have to answer. Okay, so I would say authentic is the first one. And that's probably quite a new thing. I didn't realize I wasn't being authentic, but this more recent awareness of my neurodivergence and being able to show up as myself, advocating for myself allows other people around me to accept themselves and advocate for themselves as well. So authenticity, authentic, that would be one. Calm would be another. And I say that not because I always feel calm. Don't ask my children about that one. But because it's the feedback I most often get from my coaching clients, and they say, "You're so calm. You come across as so calm." And actually, it seems to enable them to open up. My sister would use the term gentle. I chose calm, but just that I think, we're all under so much pressure. Sometimes we just need someone to hold a bit of calm, gentle space for us. So yeah, I chose calm as my other one, and compassionate, which I think speaks for itself because I'm really passionate about what I do, and I'm really compassionate towards people and how they experience life and their struggles and their experiences and their strengths. And yeah, I just really love to connect with people and support them. So those are my 3 words.
Thank you, Jules. Having worked with you, I would 100% support those 3 words as describing you. Absolutely.
Thank you.
And only knowing you for this 35 minutes we've spoken today, I'd can see those in you straight away. So thank you.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you.
So if you were going to give a message to the leaders out there that will be listening to this podcast today, what would that be?
My message would be, we're all different. We're all so different for a multitude of reasons. And, we're well aware that leaders are often creative thinkers. They are talented, they are problem solvers, they are outside the box thinkers. And often neurodivergent people are as well. And I think if we embrace that, if we embrace those positive traits of neurodivergent people, then I think that's where real inclusion will open up. I think seeing that we've got so much talent out there that's perhaps getting missed by the, inflexible routines and the inflexible communication patterns. If we can embrace that talent, then that would be real inclusion.
Thank you. And I'm going to put you on the spot now, or really, I'm going to ask you to put the next person on the spot that we'll have. And we're not going to say who that is. So this is a question, really. Just as we've asked you that question from Professor Serrant, who really, I think, gave you the opportunity there to demonstrate to us exactly what a female leader is. And so I'm going to ask you a question. What would you ask the next person coming through on our podcast?
I would love to know who it is, but I will ask the question anyway. I would ask, what is one lesson from your life, your lived experience, that you wish you'd known sooner? And what would you do with that information if you'd known it sooner? Because I think that would be a really powerful conversation.
Great question.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jules.
Thank
Great
you.
question. So Jules, just to say really a huge thank you for sharing your insights and your story with us. I think, it's the first time I've met you, and certainly your perspective on your executive coaching and your neurodiversity and you as a female leader is really inspiring, but also I think you've given some really great practical bits of information that our listeners can take away from them, and a real reminder that leadership is as much about humanity as it is about strategy, or, to use your words, perfection as well. So yeah, to our listeners, if you'd like to learn more about Jules and her kindred neurodiversity, you can find links in the show notes. We'll make sure that we provide those. And as always, thank you for joining us on our podcast. But massive thank you to you, Jules. I don't know if you've got anything to say, Nikki.
No, I think, Jules, you've said it all, and there's nothing much I can add to that. But you are an authentic leader. You are definitely calm, and I just am in awe of everything that you have become over the last few months and the time that we've worked together. So thank you very much for coming on. I know this must have been quite difficult, and I really appreciate the time that you've given us.
No, thank you. Thank you both. And thank you for making it such a warm conversation. It was a pleasure to be here. And I'll just reiterate, don't check in with my children about that calm piece.
That's the disclaimer on the bottom of the
disclaimer.
Brilliant.
What we'd like to do as well is to provide our listeners with an opportunity to really reach out and speak to Jules as an expert. So we will make sure that you have that information through our podcast as well. Jules, do you want to say that? Have you got a website or something that people can contact you on?
Yeah, my website is kindredneurodiversity.co.uk. I'm on Instagram, I'm on LinkedIn. So yeah, I'd love to hear from people if they feel like they'd need more support.
Brilliant.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Until next time, everyone, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast. We really appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you.